All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Dr. Beck. Really appreciate you taking your time out of your busy schedule for us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be talking to you today.
You're very welcome. So I'd love to start how I like to start most of my interviews, which is by letting our audience get to know you a little bit. So why don't you tell us kind of your background story, how you got to be doing what you're doing, and a little bit about what you're up to these days?
Sure. I've been in practice for a little over 12 years at this point now. I'm in New Jersey, kind of coastal town in New Jersey. So I've grown up with a very active lifestyle outside, surfing, scuba diving, skiing, boating, doing all that sort of fun stuff, playing sports my whole life. And so natural progression with keeping, a healthy lifestyle myself. I went to chiropractic school and like I said, graduated a little over 12 years ago now. And for a vast majority of my time, I've had a big part of my practice dealing with pediatric patients. In 2008, I got a diplomate in pediatrics. So I'm board certified in chiropractic pediatrics. And I think over time, that's kind of what I've put a lot of my focus on. I married with two young girls, so they've been getting adjusted since day one. And, I think it's a benefit in their lives and in our lives, and it's a good thing.
Awesome. So one of the reasons, when we were speaking beforehand, setting this interview up, I talked to Dr. Beck about his expertise with kids. And one of the big things that's going on with a lot of our kids these days is diagnosis of ADD, ADHD, and these type of things. And with our focus in Kids Eating Broccoli on healthy lifestyle habits, with a particular focus on eating habits, nutrition, and what parents can do to support their kids. Dr. Beck, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of your work with ADHD in particular, and what some of the things you coach parents to do to support their kids with that care outside of the office?
Sure. It's amazing the prevalence of ADD, ADHD now, and a lot of the neurologic disorders that we're seeing, the autism spectrum, the sensory processing, is so many different things. It's the prevalence is astronomical. In 2007, I think it was the CDC said that the rise in childhood neurologic disorders is a major health threat. And ADD, ADHD now is one of the most prevalent, if not the most prevalent, childhood problem in the world. So I kind of gravitated towards that because of those statistics. I mean, there's a lot of other problems out there we're seeing in children, and with obesity, diabetes, just everything has been getting kind of out of control. But specifically, as we're going to talk about today with ADD, ADHD, being one of the most prevalent childhood problems, it affects so many families. It affects so many communities, schools, everything have problems with it now. And unfortunately, parents are told that there's no real cure for it, and they're told that it could be managed, but it could be managed with what? With medications. And now Ritalin is one of the most prescribed medications for children in the world. They estimate there's something like 20 million prescriptions of Ritalin given out a year, and that's a conservative estimate. Right. If you look at the numbers, it's something like 4.8 million individuals are on Ritalin. So that's adult and children, but if you take 4.8 million, multiply that by 12, because there's 12 months a year, so the amount of prescriptions that are actually going out, it's astronomical. I know it was a while ago, but between 1990 and 1998, the use of Ritalin went up about 800%. And wow. Since then, it's steadily going up, and it's going up, and it's going up. And like I said, we know the effects of Ritalin. We know that Ritalin is bad for you. But what do we do? We still prescribe it. So there has to be a better way. And that's what I started looking into. And that's what I started researching. And that's what I try to help with parents, because parents don't want to put their kids on medication. They know that these medications aren't good for their kids, but they don't know what else to do. Their hands are tied, so to say. They're dealing with a hyperactive child who doesn't want to eat, who doesn't want to go to school, who doesn't want to interact with other people very well. They have other kids that they're raising. They're both working jobs. Life is crazy, and so they need something. And a lot of parents turn to the medications, and after a while, they realize that that's not the best choice either. So that's what my focus is on, is to try to help parents know that there are other options. There are other things that they can do to help. So with ADD, like I said, it affects many, many children, boys more than girls. It's just the way it happens with this disorder. It doesn't mean that girls can't be affected by it. It's just boys we see more prevalent. And one of the things that I look at, one of the things that I go into is brain balance. Basically, your brain needs to communicate. The larger parts of your brain need to communicate through electrical impulses on a continuous basis. If the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere of the brain aren't connecting, they're not communicating properly, you're going to have a disconnect in there. And with that disconnect, a lot of times we're going to see signs and symptoms in these children. They're clumsy. They don't have a sense of themselves in space. They're uncoordinated. They have poor, abnormal posture and tone. Their eye movements not quite like other kids. They gaze off into space. They don't fully experience all of their senses. And so they become easily distracted because the things that they see and they hear and they feel, they're not processing it properly. Because they don't process it properly, it puts them into a stress, essentially, and they can only focus on one thing at a time. So it's very hard for the kids, and that comes out as that hyperactive personality. They can't sit still. They can't focus. They can't complete one task at a time. They go from one task to another task to another task, and nothing ever gets done. And just simply getting them ready for school or having a meal or completing their homework, it just throws them into a frenzy, and it's a very, very difficult thing for them to process. So another issue with these kids that we see a lot, and is a lot of concern to parents, is their immune system. And they get sick a lot because their immune system is essentially out of kilter as well. Their gut is pretty much destroyed a lot of times because of some of the eating habits that they have, and we'll talk about that as well. So you have a host of issues with these kids, and it's very difficult, not only on the children, but as is on the families and the siblings as well, and teachers at school and everybody that they come in contact with. So one of the things that we like to do is we try to isolate which hemisphere of the brain is not functioning properly, whether it's a little sluggish or it's overactive. And you do that through a series of tests to assess the signs and the symptoms and the function and the abilities of the hemispheres to communicate with one another and how they're communicating, how they're functioning. Pretty extensive. You go through a series of motor skills, fine motor skills, primitive reflexes. One of the things that we see a lot in kids with ADD, ADHD, and a lot of neurodevelopmental issues are cross-handedness, where 90% of us are right-handed. 10% of people are left-handed. That doesn't mean you have a neurodiagnostic problem, but what happens in a lot of these kids is they'll be left-footed, whereas I'm right-handed and right-footed. So their brains aren't communicating properly. So as you go through a lot of those different testings, and part of what we look at too is, a checklist for the brain, but also the mother, her pregnancy, her health history. We look at their diet, we look at their vital signs, developmental milestones, vision, primitive reflexes, posture, all those different things, their sound, their ability to decipher sound and taste and smell, core stability. And once you kind of put that together, then one of the things that you develop a program to counteract all of that. So we'll do sensory motory exercises and hemispheric exercises and vision and proprioception, some music, some core strength exercises, and nutrition. Nutrition is a big part of it as well. So that's a kind of a basic, kind of in-depth overview of what we do here with kids. And I know one of the big things with this podcast, Kids Eating Broccoli, of course, is we want to talk about nutrition. And nutrition is so important, as you know, just in everyday life, not with just kids who have neurodevelopmental issues. It's you and me and our children, and anybody with the standard American diet is kind of backwards right now, and we're doing ourselves a disservice. Obesity is raising. We're seeing type 2 diabetes in children these days. So many things are heart diseases and cancers and everything like that. It affects everybody. So the standard American diet is really not a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really failing us. Our standard diet is a failure, and it's showing up everywhere.
Tremendously.
Yeah. I'd love to just dive in a little bit into a couple of those things you mentioned. I was jotting down notes as fast as I could here. And so, because it sounds like you do quite an in-depth evaluation, looking at many different aspects of the body, many different aspects of the function. I mean, a lot of it obviously focused around the brain. But you also mentioned the immune system is often poor with these kids. Can you elaborate a little what the connection is?
Sure. A lot of these kids have leaky gut syndrome, and part of it is the brain connection in there. So the right hemisphere of your brain is very integral in seeing the whole picture. Okay, it sees the big things, but it can't see the smaller things. Basically, you could see the forest, but you can't see the individual trees. It's very responsible for large muscle movement, postural movement, spatial realization, proprioception. But one of the other things it controls is digestion. And when children with ADD, ADHD typically tend to be right brain deficient. So the right brain is sluggish. It's not functioning as well as it should. And that goes into some of the digestion issues. Your immune system is actually almost positive your immune system is both side, right and left side. But the right side with the digestion and the immune system, if the brain is sluggish, you're not getting that proper digestion. You're not, you tend to have the leaky gut syndrome in there. And when that happens, as you well know, your immune system, a big part of your immune system is housed in your gut. And when that's not functioning properly, when there's overproductions of yeast and other issues in there, you're not getting a proper immunity. And that's why a lot of these kids do wind up getting sick more often.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of good sense. I mean, if you look at it from that, the brain perspective and the neurology perspective. And so then the other 2 points that I kind of wrote down here, I think they probably tie together a bit. But one, you mentioned also looking at the pregnancy of the mom, and in terms of evaluating, where these kids are. And so what are you looking for, and how does that affect the kids?
Well, mom's health history, of course. During pregnancy, how was her diet? What was she exposed to? Are there smokers in the family? Was she exposed to pesticides, different chemicals. Did she have any, gestational diabetes? Was preeclampsia? So you want to look into that as well, because I think it's a whole. We try to look at the whole system. We look at everything, not just the child, but we look at the surroundings as well. We like to talk to the parents about sometimes their parenting styles. I think a lot of times that a counselor is a little bit of a, more prepared to have those type of conversations, but I get into that as well, because you look at the whole. I think too many people get focused on looking at one thing, and when they look at somebody in one direction, you miss so many other things. And so we try to put it all together to see, all right, were there exposures of poor nutrition with the mother as she was going through the pregnancy? Were there other things, out of her control? What were her surroundings like as well? Because I think that does have an impact on it.
And so I think that's, I always appreciate that message. I think that it's often overlooked in our culture that the health of the mom during pregnancy has such an effect on the kid, not just when they're a baby, but going forward throughout their life, and even pre-pregnancy, honestly.
Yes, very much so.
And so that kind of dovetails into what are some of the, and this might, you might have to speculate, I don't know, but what do you think some of the more common causes are? What do you see in terms of correlations with these families and these kids in terms of, what the most likely causes of this situation is for them?
That's a tough one. It's there are so many factors. There are so many things that it's a very hard question to ask or to answer. I'm sorry. It's our society right now, I think, is in a state of dysfunction when it comes to health and wellness. And I think because of that, so many things contribute. I think our nutrition is a big part. I think our intake of water is a big part. People don't drink water anymore for some reason. We have tons of chemicals around us now, between pesticides and herbicides and smoke and the smog and congestion, and depending on where you're at, a lot of environmental factors in there. I think that we tend to, now I don't think this is a portion of it, but I think we tend to push our kids to grow up much faster than we used to. Kids can't be kids anymore. They're going to daycare right away, or they're going to school right away, and we're not teaching them to play and have fun. We want them to be little adults very quickly, and I think over time that has started to affect us genetically to a point. For millions of years, we've been eating healthy, eating clean, eating from nature. And, relatively recently in human history, now we start introducing all these chemicals, all these processed foods, all these additives, all these substances. And I think it's affecting us as a society as a whole.
Absolutely. No doubt about that. That's interesting what you're saying about having our kids grow up too fast and not just being kids and playing. It just brought back a lecture I was watching, somebody who studies play. There's such a thing, a PhD in studying play. And they were remarking, yeah, I know, really, who'd have thought? And they were remarking that we're the only species on the planet that stops playing when we become adults. Yeah. If you think about your dog or your cat or any other animal, they play throughout their whole lives as long as they're physically able. And
right. Could you imagine having the energy and the outlook on life that your children have right now? At this stage of your life, it's most adults can't. They yearn for that. They want that. Because we've gotten away from that so much. I fear that 10, 20, 30 years, whatever it may be from now, that kids are going to yearn for that energy and that vitality, because we're taking it away from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, in so many ways, the parenting, but also nutritionally too. If you think about, a
Yes.
kid who's fed processed, dead food, high sugar, they aren't going to have the energy to run outside and play. And we often blame it on the, things like the technology, which certainly is part of it. But it's like if you only have
Mhm.
the energy to sit and stare at the wall or stare at a TV, you're going to put a
Yeah,
TV in front of you, right? And so,
exactly.
in terms of, because we do have that particular focus on kids eating broccoli on nutrition, let's dive into that a little bit. Um, and it
Absolutely.
sounds like, and I don't mean to minimize the individuality, because it sounds like because you look into so many aspects and variables in the child and their lifestyle and all of those things, I don't mean to brush it with a wide stroke of like, what should you tell everybody? What should you, but, here we are speaking to perhaps an audience that will, never go to your office or my office or, but wants to have
Right.
some of the basics. So what I would start with is, um, I guess basically just start the basics. So what would you say the most important things to one, to make sure your kids are eating sufficiently, if they're not, and two, what to make sure they're not eating?
Okay. Well, let's start with what you shouldn't be eating. And I think some of these things will surprise you, and some of them you'll say, yeah, of course, we know that now in today's society. So one of the couple of the big things that you want to avoid with hyperactive kids, ADD, ADHD kids, um, autism spectrum disorders, OCD, sensory processing, any of those neuro kind of developmental disorders. There's for the most part, there's generalities, and the general things that you want to avoid the glutens, avoid the dairy, avoid eggs, yeast, legumes, beans and peas and stuff like that. Even you think that, oh, that's healthy for you, but they're very difficult to digest. Um, Apples, tomato, soy, corn, citrus, those things. Those are probably the highest ones that you want to stay away from. One of the best things that you can do, and it's difficult for adults. It's sometimes even harder with children, but you want to determine which foods are seem to cause a reaction, whether it be a good or a bad reaction. You want to see which foods are causing reactions in kids. So a lot of parents focus on food allergies. There's a major difference between a food allergy and a food sensitivity. People know food allergies as you eat a peanut and you go into anaphylactic shock, your face swells up, your throat swells up. Okay, that's a very, very small percentage of people that actually happens to. More often, we are inflicted with food sensitivities, and you may not get a reaction right away. It may be an hour or two later. It may be a couple days later that you start to get a reaction to. And that reaction in some children may be diarrhea. It may be constipation. It may be stomach pains, headaches. Um, a lot of different signs and symptoms. And the only way to find out what your trigger is, because you don't have that immediate reaction like you do if you eat peanuts or shellfish or whatever in some cases, what you should do is really keep a food log for 7, 10 days or so. Write down everything that you eat, write down when you eat it, what time you eat it, and then kind of track your progress as you go along throughout the day. Okay, Johnny ate an apple at 10 a.m. By 12 o'clock, he was complaining about a headache or a stomach ache or whatever it may be. So you go through a food diary, and it's difficult because a lot of parents aren't with their kids all day long. You're at school and stuff, but you do the best that you can with it. From there, what you want to do is more of an elimination type of a diet. Okay, so we're going to start taking all of these things away. And you start with those common ones that I talked about: the glutens, the dairy, the eggs, the soy, the tomatoes and apples and yeasts. Take that stuff away. Okay, then you can start, again, keep that food diary, let your system clean out a little bit, and then you start reintroducing foods into your diet. And at that point, you're going to see how you react to it. Sometimes when something has been gone for a while and you reintroduce it, you react much faster to it. A lot of times, children with ADD, ADHD, they actually crave foods that they have sensitivities to. It's another one of those brain balance things. They crave what they really should not be having. And you and I do that too. Sugars, and sugar is added into what everything that we have now.
Pretty much.
And it's sugar is a toxin. Essentially, it makes you addicted. It makes you want to have more of it when you know that you shouldn't have more of it. So the same thing happens with these kids. And so by doing a food diary, trying to figure out what your sensitivities are, eliminating and then slowly reintroducing. A lot of times we can help parents target what the good foods, safe foods are for their child. So what do we take away? All those. What do we add?
Mm-hmm.
Well, study after study after study on ADD, ADHD shows that you're going to have deficiencies in multiple vitamins, essential fatty acids, and minerals. So vitamin A, vitamin D, calcium, magnesium, potassium, your B vitamins, some of your essential fatty acids, the omega-3, and then your fatty acids, omega-3s and omega-6s. We were talking about the standard American diet earlier. What we should be is a 2-to-1 ratio between omega-6s and omega-3s. And where we're at now is 20-to-1, 30-to-1 on omega-6s to omega-3s. So we're out of kilter with that, and that's very good for brain function and cardiovascular function and so many other things. Digestive enzymes a lot of times are very important. Zinc, that's very important. So I know that's a very big list of things that are important for these kids, but in general, with ADD, ADHD, those are the most important to add. So for parents, to kind of sum up here, for parents, what you want to do if you feel that your kid is hyperactive or has something going on, one of the first easiest ways on your own is to work with the diet. Avoid the triggers, the glutens, the dairies, the sugars, of course, like we said, yeast and beans and apples, tomatoes, soy. Avoid that stuff and start eating clean and slowly introducing. I gave a laundry list of vitamins and minerals and that sort of stuff. Where I would start: vitamin A, vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids, and probably B vitamins. I would go with those 4 different things right there: vitamin A, vitamin D, B vitamins, and your essential fatty acids. I would start with that. And it takes time. Parents want that magic bullet, and Ritalin is sometimes that magic bullet, they think. With nutrition and healing your body, there is no such thing as a magic bullet. If you want long-term success, you have to be patient, and you have to work with your child. And it is trying, and it's very difficult at times, but in the long run, you can see significant increases in their what you would think as a quote unquote normal child. They can achieve what you want them to achieve.
Okay, so I gotta ask the ones that stick out as, maybe what you would, gluten, dairy, those are soy, those are things people are probably used to, but apples, citrus, and tomatoes. Can you say just a little bit at least about that?
Sure. Okay. Citrus and tomato, because of the acidity content in it, that will a lot of times affect the whole leaky gut syndrome, and then that will kind of throw everything into a frenzy at that point. So I know there's a lot more than that to go in depth with it,
Sure.
but it's I don't remember all the things off the top of my head here, Doc.
No worries.
But yeah, but that's one that I know a lot of the research
Uh-huh.
says that you definitely want to avoid because of their effects on the gut and the immune system with
Hmm.
hyperactive children. So yeah, some of them are very very surprising. Eggs were for a long time the perfect food, and then it was
Hmm.
don't go near eggs because of
Right.
the cholesterol content, and then there it's the perfect food again. But again, eggs and dairy because of the proteins in them again can affect everything.
Gotcha. And so those are maybe more specifically related to, because I mean, when I think about things like soy and some of the other, I mean, and processed things and sugar, that'd be good for all of us to just, X out of our diet in most cases.
There's
And
no
some of
need
these other
for it.
things are maybe, yeah, are maybe more specific for
Hmm.
the kids who are struggling to improve and get better in these ways.
Right, right.
Um,
Yeah, I don't go around telling my patients stop eating apples, stop eating,
mhm.
tomatoes or oranges. It's specific towards
Mhm.
this condition.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Um, And so, it's also interesting that you mentioned the first two vitamins you mentioned were vitamin A and D. I was just doing an interview recently with Sally Fallon Morell from the Weston Price Foundation. I don't know if you're familiar with them or Nourishing Traditions, but they focus a lot on um, healthy fats and traditional diets and things like that. And those were two of the first vitamins she mentioned as well. I mean, not to be surprised that two intelligent people would say the same thing, but but she was mentioning vitamin A in particular, that in our current dietary recommendations basically have almost zero vitamin A,
Right,
from the food,
from the food,
and
and
yeah.
that's the best. You just bring something up that kind of just stroked my memory here. Is supplementation in some people is very necessary, but to actually get the nutrients from food, that's how we were meant to get these nutrients. So it's very important to try to eat foods rich in these vitamins and these minerals too. I think your body is just going to absorb it better, and I think you're going to do better with it that way.
Absolutely. But it
So,
makes
but
sense.
yeah,
That's how we were
vitamin A,
designed.
exactly. Vitamin A and vitamin D they're huge. They're very big, important ones. I think they're very important for most people. I live in New Jersey in the wintertime, although this winter wasn't too cold and drab. But the wintertime, you're not outside. You're not doing anything.
Mm.
You're not getting that natural vitamin D. Vitamin D is good for so many things. I mean, I've seen studies that say vitamin D is, you know, 10 times, 20 times, whatever, more effective than the flu vaccination. So there's so many benefits for your immune system overall. Vitamin A, in my house, if you start to get a runny nose or a scratchy throat, you get adjusted, you get your vitamin A, you get your vitamin D, you
Mhm.
drink tons of water because it helps your immune system out.
Absolutely. So what would you say for parents who want to sort of research more or learn more? What are some good resources? Because obviously, any parent who is dealing with these situations in this day and age, that there's thousands and thousands of contradictory opinions sometimes you can find online by googling things, and so could you point
Hmm.
our parents in a couple or at least one good direction for that?
Sure. Being a pediatric chiropractor, I belong to a couple different pediatric associations. And one that I think has very, very good resources for parents is the ICPA. It's the International Chiropractic Pediatric Association. Their website is, I believe it's www.icpa, the number 4kids.com. They have some very, very good resources on there. the ICA, it's kind of confusing. The ICA, the International Chiropractic Association, they have a council on pediatrics as well, and there's also some good information on their website as well for parents, for resources to look into. And so I think those are two very good, vetted. They're good research, solid research out there for natural ways to help.
Yeah. Well, and that's great. I mean, because really, like you were mentioning at the beginning, in my own practice, working with kids and parents and these different issues, because it's, it is so prevalent. It just struck me one day. I mean, it sort of seems like one of those obvious things, but, as a parent myself, I get it that no parent wants to give their kids drugs. I mean,
Right.
no one had, like, if, you could do it a natural way or you could do it with drugs, they would pick, you always want the best for your kids. And we understand that drugs have other effects. And of course, when the situation becomes what it is, a high stress, unmanageable, we turn to those things, and that's totally understandable. But to know that there are other options is so valuable.
Exactly.
And of course, with what you're talking about, in terms of all the different brain stuff and balancing the brain and the hemispheres and so forth. I mean, the nutrition changes and those types of things we can do at home as parents are great, but it also sounds like to really make a significant difference for a lot of these kids, it's finding a really good practitioner to help with that brain balance and some of those neurologic aspects as well.
You definitely, it's definitely beneficial for you to find somebody who can walk you through the process. A lot of it still falls on the parents and the child themselves. They have to do these exercises and stuff at home. There is there's some books out there that I like. Dr. Robert Melillo, as he has a brain balance program, and a lot of what I do is kind of mimics that, is based off of a lot of that sort of stuff. So there are some very good books that he has out there that will help with nutrition, that will help with having the parents recognize different things and some stuff that they can do at home as well.
You have it happen to know how to spell that last name?
Sure, it's Melillo.
Hello, just how it sounds. All right.
Yes, and his he's got several books out there. The Disconnected Kids is the one book that kind of goes over a lot of stuff that we went over today.
Excellent. So that'd be a great place for parents to turn as well if they want to know more, get in more in depth with what we shared.
It would be a fantastic resource for them. Yes, it's awesome. A resource that I use quite often as well.
Great. So also, if we have families in the New Jersey area, what's the best way if they want to reach out and get in touch with you? Tell us how we do that.
Sure. My website, you can always go to my website. It's www.beckwellnessnj.com. You can find me on Facebook with Beck Wellness NJ. There's another Beck Wellness out in the middle of the country somewhere. Gotcha. And those are the best ways for parents to get my information. My email address, they could contact me, directly through Facebook with any questions or anything like that. I'm always happy to answer questions and help out.
I appreciate that. I'm sure some of our listeners appreciate that too, to really be able to have, because sometimes it's just one question here or one thing here can really make a big difference. So to have that,
absolutely,
that's very generous of you to give that access. All right. So in wrapping up, what if there was kind of one general thing or one, you can be specific, I suppose, but if you had just one thing to share with a parent who's kind of struggling with a kid or even more than one kid who's having a hard time with ADD, ADHD, what would sort of be your kind of key statement or key piece of info you might give them?
Hang in there. It's not the child's fault. if they are truly ADD, ADHD, young kids are very active, but when it gets to that level where they've received that diagnosis or whatever, it's not their fault. They're not being defiant. They're not being bad kids. They just need help, and they don't know how to ask for help. Their body is not functioning as our body functions. They don't feel, they don't process, they don't sense the way that we do if we don't have those issues. So be patient with them, as hard as it is, and it's hard sometimes, but you need to be patient with them. You need to listen to them as well, because sometimes they know what they need a little bit more than we know what they need. And seek out help. There is help out there. There are practitioners around the country who can give you tremendous amount of help. And ask lots of questions, and just know that with these type of disorders, there's not a magic bullet. It's not going to go away overnight. It takes time, it takes patience and perseverance, but the kids can be helped.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking your time with us today. I really appreciate it. Tons of value shared. And really hope shared, honestly, too. So I appreciate that so much. And I guess you take care.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to have me on today.
You're very welcome. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.